Welcome to the Workshop Therapy Podcast. I'm your host, Andrew, and with me today is the Maker Community's personal librarian, Mr. Matthew Serio.
Good morning.
How's it going today?
It is going well. Trying to schedule this was exciting. We're going to talk about stress. That was the most stressful part of my week so far. No, everything's going great.
It sounds like you might have some stress going on in the background there with your dogs viciously savaging somebody. Or
I think they might be in their crates because my wife is trying to do work upstairs. So either that or she's gone outside to work on our deck and they don't like being cooped up.
They're jealous.
Yes.
So before we get too far in, I have a question for you. How do you say the is it Argiano Serio? Argiano Serio?
Actually, any way anybody says it is perfectly fine with me. So many people have said, "Oh, I know how to say your name, the name of your label, your brand correctly." But really, Argiano Serio, it's fine. However you want to pronounce it is fine with me.
Now that we got that right, remind me. I remember you talking on the Working End podcast. That's Italian for that, right?
So my last name is Serio, which in Italian means serious, and Argiano means craftsman. So serious craftsman, which I'm not, but it's all right.
It's the aspirational title, right?
Not at all. No, I never want to become a serious craftsman because there's too much stress involved in that. Then you lose the joy.
It does for some. The times when I get into like the production stuff in the shop, it goes from like, I'm enjoying my time in the shop to I can't believe I'm doing this. Why am I doing this nonsense?
Exactly. It's tough.
With the exception of when I've had a few commissions where it's been a complete freedom, design, build the whole thing. I've enjoyed that because it's kind of like I'm doing what I want to do and somebody else is paying me to do it, which is a good thing. But
I only do commissions and I don't ever get any like that where it's like you have complete control. I wish I had that.
I don't get it very often. How did you get into the whole book thing? Like that's Three Kings, right? Isn't that how that started?
Okay, I've always loved books. I'm a bookaholic. Earlier in life, I managed Borders Books and Music, which is no longer around. Did you guys have those in Canada? Did you guys have Borders?
Yeah, we used to have Borders. I think Chapters, is who owns it now.
Okay, I started at a Walden Books in the mall, and then I had managed a Dairy Queen growing up. And when I was doing that, I'd have my winters off. I took a job, Borders, and then I worked my way up to management, and I'd love the 40% off. So I would buy so many books. It got to the point where nobody wanted to help me move just because I had boxes upon boxes of books. So I've always loved books. My house is filled with books. I am happy to say that I have raised two readers. My daughter actually now works at Barnes & Noble's, so I get the discount now. She reads so much, and my son also reads a lot. So what happened, the whole thing where I got the title of the Maker Librarian from Keith Drennan, one of your previous guests. Last year, after the Catskill Mountain Maker Camp, I was having conversations through DMs with several makers. Many of them were saying how much of a letdown it was after coming off of this like mountaintop high of Maker Camp, of being around so many like-minded people, sharing experiences, sharing skills, sharing a love for making things, that when they left there and they went home into their personal shops, they had new ideas and maybe new ways to look at something, but they are then working in their little creative silos. We're all on social media. We all love Instagram, and you get that little heart when someone likes one of your posts, but that really doesn't, there's not as much of a connection. So during the Christmas season, I like to support as many makers as possible. So during the Christmas season, there was a artist market up in New York, in Tarrytown, New York, which is really like right next to Sleepy Hollow from, the literary legend. So I went up there, and it's called Maker Central New York, and that is a co-op of a bunch of makers. That there is a potter in there that I can't remember Colin's last name. It's Irish. Anyway, he did not need all the space for his business. So he opened it up to like a woman that makes paper, Natalie from Batflower Press. And there's two carpenters in there, and there's a jewelry maker, and there's a bladesmith. And they're only open to the public 2 or 3 times a year. So they were having a market. So I went up there and I bought a whole bunch of maker gifts. And then in January for Three Kings Day, Three Kings Day is the holiday. It's in a lot of European countries where they actually celebrate when the 3 wise men arrived, because they were not there on Christmas Day. So it's Epiphany. So they arrived and they give out gifts. So to celebrate Three Kings Day, I sent out small packages, some, hand-carved bowls, some jewelry, quilts, things like that, to a lot of different makers as just a way of, spreading joy through the community. And I thought, I'm going to do this every year. And then later in the month, maybe early February, I was like, maybe I don't want to wait till next January to do this again. So I decided to send out books. So I went, and I'm in used bookstores and rare bookstores all the time. And I'm always finding interesting things, like a Dixon catalog from 1926 that just has like all old tools in it, or, something like, this Now That You Own Your Home from like 1910, something like that, which I think I gave that one to Jimmy DiResta. So there's different people I've met through the maker community. And then I was like, all right, well, then there's people that I haven't met, and I just know them through social media. So I find their addresses. Occasionally I'll actually ask for the address, but I don't like doing that unless I have to, because I don't want them to know something's coming. And I just send out random notes and a book, just so that they know that even if we're not all together, that there's somebody in the community that is thinking of them and wishing them well. So that's kind of how it started.
Yeah, I'd like the one you sent me. I'm working my way through it, but I'm working on my master's right now, so it's not top tier reading material for me currently, but when I have time, I definitely work my way through it. And the thing that kind of struck me about it was the fact that social media tends to be very inwardly focused a lot, because it's like, oh, look at me doing this, look at me doing that, and you respond to the people who comment, and you go, oh, look, I've got this many views and this many hearts and blah blah blah, but you tend not to associate that interaction with somebody who actually exists somewhere else, And so when you get that like tangible physical thing of, oh yeah, somebody is actually interacting with me, and it's not all internet.
Right. And I don't want to just send a card, because you get it. And I've had several people say that, I was having a really rough week and I got this package, and, it made me feel so much better. And I love hearing that. But, but I like having something more than just a card, because you read the card, and then, if you really like it, you'll keep it in your desk, or you'll maybe hang it up. But when you send something, especially like a book, that's something that's going to be on the shelf, it's a constant reminder that there is someone that is thinking of you and wishing you well. And it's funny, because Dave Bauer actually contacted me and said, have you read all of these books that you've sent out? I sent him a list. It was about, I think now I'm up to about 200. Out of all the ones that I sent, I think about 90% I've actually read, because I did a lot I used to be an instructor for Penn State business incubator, that was also attached to a makerspace. So we would get a lot of business books and things like that related, especially to the arts. So I was constantly reading those and recommending those. So a lot of the stuff I have read. I've now gotten into more of researching, doing a lot of research into who I'm sending it to, and sending them something that's not necessarily related to their craft. But if they're interested in dogs, or if they're interested in nature or repairing things, I'll find something that's, better suited. And a lot of times I'll be in a rare bookstore and I'll come across something. I'm like, oh, I know who this should go to. and I'll just pick it up and send it out to them.
You ever listen to the Greg McEwen podcast at all?
No.
He's a really good, he's a business consultant coach type of guy. You might have read his books actually, or you should read his books. Essentialism.
Yeah.
Shoot. What's the other one? Yeah, you should look them up. Really, really good.
Okay.
They're, Essentialism is one of them. And for the life of me, I can't remember the other one. Anyway, a few podcasts ago, he made a comment about reading. He says you can go to YouTube and you can watch a video, or you can look up on the internet and you can read something. But there's something more impactful about a book, and it's because it's condensed knowledge. If you want to learn something, a book is the best source, because it's not just a throwaway thing. It takes effort, and it takes time, and it takes money to produce a book, and so it's more likely to be of value than a random person on the internet and their riff-off page because they can throw in some affiliate links, right? But
so do you have affiliate links for your journal?
I do. Yeah, all the links that I actually put up for that are actually affiliate links, because I mean, like it's Amazon digital publishing, right, or Kindle digital publishing, and basically anybody can come up with the design and put it up there, and it doesn't cost you anything to put up, and blah blah blah, and you get a certain percentage of it. But then, since I have the affiliate stuff set up anyway, and I hardly ever use it, I just produce the link from the affiliate thing, and then I get an extra 5% on top of that. And
well, I got 30 more copies coming today,
and I appreciate it. You've probably bought more copies than anybody else combined, in all honesty.
People love that. I'm sending it. I think I've sent out around 20 copies already. They love that journal. It's great.
Well, I thought about it a bunch, and I'll admit that I ripped it off of Bryce, the idea, because he has his little waffle beaver scribbler thing.
Uh-huh.
But I didn't just rip it off of him. He ripped it off from somebody else. I don't remember who he said it was, but so I'm just a long-term thief.
When you asked me if there's anything you can do to improve it, and I said, no, it's perfect, that's because I'm going to rip off the idea from you. Be free to do so, because I have no intellectual rights to it. And you go onto Amazon. There's thousands of those things there, But I like the way I designed it, because I like the crosshatch, and I have like having notes below, because that's how my brain thinks. But then I highly recommend it to anybody that's listening to this podcast, and anybody else out there as well.
Well, I appreciate that. So how do you find? Well, obviously people really like it. Is that building the community thing? Do you find that helps with your mental health? Do you find that like makes you feel good? Is that the main reason you do it, or do you think it's
both? I think I feel good about building the community. I think it's very important. For the longest time, I was looking for my place in the community, and I really didn't want to. I mean, there's a lot of people out there that are just fighting for views. They are, and so when I talk to people, there's some makers, and some of the bigger names, one that I'm thinking of particularly really rubs me the wrong way. And it's just all about the views. It's all about collaborating, and it's none of our friends. This person has never been to the Catskill Maker Camp, just so that people aren't like, oh my God, is he talking about me? But this person...
Well, I haven't been there either, so you're talking about me.
Well, yes, the biggest name in the Canadian Maker Camp, the maker community. So, but it's all about collaborating and just stealing other people's thunder sometimes, and that they make themselves out to be like a bigger person than they are. So that kind of stuff, that always bothered me, because I think it alienates so many people. So like community, I try to focus on like the smaller names, like the people that they come and they feel that they're just happy to be in the community. And it's like, no, we're one big community. Like everybody is equal in this community, because you can learn something from anybody. It's not, maybe this person's been doing it for 10, 15 years. They think they know all the tricks, but everything evolves. There's always a new way to do it. Someone that's doing something with hand tools, they can learn something from someone that's doing it with a router or a laser cutter or something like that. And that's actually when I started making, that's what I wanted to do. I really wanted to make stuff which people thought was handmade, but it was not. And I mean, I really just play around for the most part. I do commissions, but all the money that I make goes back into the community. It's what supports my Patreon habit. It's what supports my, it's buying stuff from different makers, the postage of sending out all those books, which actually the reason why I focus on books is because the media mail rate is a lot cheaper than the other.
Yeah.
Except for you guys in Canada. Oh my gosh. You know how expensive it is to ship something? For just going over that border it costs so much more. So for you Canadians that get something from me, just know that I go that extra, I have to fill out that customs form. Wow, it's a pain in the butt.
You know what absolutely turns my crank with that though? Is it's cheaper for me to ship stuff to you than it is to ship stuff to the next province over within Canada. It ticks me off every stinking time.
Really? It's more.
Yeah. Last year I sent cutting boards. What they were. I shipped out like 2 cutting boards at the same time. One was going to Montreal, and one was going to. I think it was going to New York. No, Boston. It was going to Boston, and it was $10 cheaper to ship to Boston than it was to Montreal.
Oh no!
I was like, what the? How?
The reason I'm okay, so we're doing the Timberin is this coming weekend, and our good friend Tony is coming down, and he's riding his motorcycle down, and I contacted him and I said, hey, it is so expensive to ship stuff to Canada. Can you take packages with you and ship them from Canada within Canada? And now I'm thinking that might not be the best idea.
It honestly ends up being about the same price.
All right, never mind. It's cheap. It's actually cheap to ship stuff within the United States. So anyway, so yes, that's where the whole thing with the sending out little, get happy gifts, little things to remind people they are being thought of.
Well, I appreciate it. Hey, I just wanted to interject here and say a couple things about supporting the podcast. If you really want to support the podcast, I'd love it if you'd hop over to Patreon and check it out. Top-tier patrons have access to one-on-one coaching sessions for physical and mental health and wellness at a fraction of the price I charge in my regular practice for the exact same services. As a special sign of my appreciation for the first 5 patrons who sign up at any level, they will receive a shout-out as founding members for the rest of the existence of the podcast, even if they choose to stop supporting at some point. If you don't want to support the podcast financially, I completely understand. Sharing the show, and more especially sharing the information from the show, is a great way to show support. Don't forget to tag me in any post you share. Thanks for listening. Now back to the show. I remember you talking at one point about you were running like art grants or something like that, right?
Yes. So let's see. After I left Borders, I did a bunch of other things. I worked for a newspaper. That's where I met my wife. And then I got a job working for a regional arts council. So the Berks Arts Council, Berks County, Pennsylvania is where I live. And they were the re-granting partner for the Pennsylvania Council of the Arts. The Pennsylvania Council on the Arts works in the governor's office of the Commonwealth, and they grant out money to arts organizations and artists. And when I worked for the Berks Arts Council, I would re-grant out funds to a 4-county region. So I worked for them for about 6 years. I left the Berks Arts Council and then went and did fundraising and grant writing for Habitat for Humanity. For those of you who aren't familiar with Habitat for Humanity, they build houses. They have volunteers that help build houses, and they're for low-income families. They're quality homes, and the families have to help build them or have people help build them. And then they're for families that make about $26,000 a year. So there's no interest on it, and they pay that off, and then that money goes into building other homes. So I went from with doing the re-granting for the arts, having a very, very small impact on a large group of people to working for Habitat, where I had a huge impact on a very small group of people. And I worked for Habitat for 2 different affiliates for a few years. And then I got a call from the state, from the Commonwealth, asking if I wanted to oversee the re-granting program for the entire Commonwealth. So I started working there for the state of Pennsylvania, and I was there for about 6 years until I lost my job during the pandemic. But during that time, I oversaw about $6 million worth of funding out of a $9 million budget. And that was going to arts organizations around the Commonwealth, some for arts education, for theater groups, for like the Philadelphia Museum of Art, large organizations, and also some of that did go for art therapy programs.
Did you get to see much of the impact of that? How that helped people, or?
Yes, there were several ones that I recommended for awards that we were having, and I'm trying to remember. I remember the gist of a lot of them, but not the specifics. I know that there was one young woman who was leading art journaling for people with PTSD, a way of writing poetry so that it's not necessary. It's a way of them to move through the trauma without focusing on it head on. And a lot of times that's what art therapy is. I mean, so there's different types of art therapy. There's some that are, let's do art for motor skills, for, to help develop fine motor skills, things like that. It's another activity, just like an exercise. It's also very helpful in youth, children that cannot necessarily verbalize what they are feeling or what they're experiencing. There's several, which I'm sure there's several books that, there's a whole thing of books on art therapy, and the people that are for it and also the people that are against it that think it's a bunch of hogwash, which I am not in that. Yeah, I'm not in that at all. So
I actually just read a study that goes along with that, and it's not necessarily art therapy, but it was talking about dealing with trauma. People are very, very story oriented, right? Like people, like you see the social media stuff or whatever all the time. It's always about telling the story, right? And this paper was talking about how PTSD is being trapped at a point in the story that you can't get past. And so you keep reliving that point in that story. And so he was talking about art therapy and journaling in particular as being able to complete that story. Is you move through the storyline, get to that point, and then you write the conclusion to it, or you create the conclusion to it. And that's part of that ability to move through and move past, is that completing the story. It was a really interesting paper and kind of an interesting theory to read.
And also the whole thing with, we're woodworkers, so we sometimes focus on that. But one of the great things about woodworking in art therapy is it gives the person, they have control. They have control over what they're doing. Sometimes it's repetitive. Sometimes they can just do it without thinking, which is nice. It's a safe, the shop is not necessarily a safe place, but with keeping all the outside anxiety and that at bay, it is a safe place in that sense. So, I highly recommend woodworking as a hobby for someone that wants to use it as art therapy. I would not recommend woodworking as a profession to get away from stress.
Yeah, it definitely increases the level of stress when they're trying to make a living off of it. And yes. The problem, at least my experience around here, the problem with any sort of here's a thing that I've made and trying to sell is the fact that there's a whole bunch of old guys who have retired, old retired doctors that are just trying to cover the cost of their materials. And so you get this, you go to the farmer's market, how are you selling this cutting board for $25 or $50? It's like you've got 15 species of wood in it. You got to have 5-10 hours of time.
So that's just how much it costs me to make it.
Yeah, that's exactly it, right? And so when you're trying to legitimately charge for your time, you can't do the one-off things and sell them locally because there's a bunch of old men around here.
That's it. Get rid of the old men. Hire them. That's all you'd have to do. It cuts down you know what? Buy them all up and sell them for a higher price.
Yeah. Yeah. Speaking of old men undercutting people, though, going back to your Habitat for Humanity thing, when my parents, they lived in Fiji for a couple of years, right? They got to know this family who there was mother and father and 4 kids, and they lived and ran a bakery out of their home. They invited my parents over for dinner one time, and my parents get to where they said their address was, and my dad's looking around and he doesn't see a house anywhere, All he could see was a pig shelter. Out these Fijians came from this little hut, and my dad said it was about 10 feet square, and they lived in it and ran a bakery out of this little house, this little shack. And so my dad's talking to him about it, and well, how come you can't get a bigger house? And but they just couldn't afford it, and they talked to Habitat for Humanity, and they couldn't. It was just beyond their financial reach. Even Habitat for Humanity was, and so my dad, he's running him and my brother owned an oil field company at the time, and they had some extra funds kicking around, and so my dad started looking into it, and he's figured out that he could build a house for these people for, it was like $8,000 or something like that, right? And no windows or anything, but when it's, a constant 85 degrees year round, do you need a window? Anyway, so he starts building this house, and he said the worst thing about it was he felt bad because he used mahogany for the studs. It was cheaper to use mahogany to build this house than it was to use pine or anything else. So
it's shipping it across the world is what adds all the cost to it.
Yeah, the whole art therapy thing and doing things for other people and the creativity aspects of making, I think, is really good for your brain, because it allows you to kind of step away from the stress and day-to-day drudgery and use that creativity part of your head for a little bit.
So I mean, I love the design aspect of everything. That's what I absolutely love. So it's when I am designing something, it's when I actually have to build it, and then it gets into the details. That's when I start getting stressed about that. Like my day-to-day job is not difficult at all. It's stressful when I actually never said what I do for a living. So I work for a company called Uptronics, and we handle UPS systems, which are uninterruptible power supplies for like hospitals and banks and data centers. So when I'm
actually generator type of things.
So right. So not the actual generator. So when say you're in the hospital and you're being operated on, and someone hits a utility pole outside and all the power goes off, a generator takes, even if it's instantaneous, takes a few moments to spin up and get started. What a UPS system does is in that millisecond, it switches over to a battery backup, and they can run for, depending on the size of a system. And they're usually set up for like one operating room, or, if someone's on in a radiology, it's for just a room it's set up. That's why when you go into hospitals and you see the orange plugs, those are usually the ones that are hooked up to the system. So it keeps everything going until the generator starts up. Our company services them, tests the batteries, go in there with high voltage, and we, make sure everything's working fine. We do a lot of preventative maintenance. So when I am on the job and in the unit, there's a lot of high stress because there's danger involved with that. But the rest of the time, there's not. So it's an incredible company to work for. They take care of us. They're very nice, and I'm so happy to have found this job after the pandemic. And it had nothing to do with any of my education or my skills going into it. I do not touch a single grant. I do not write grants. I don't do anything like that. I do that on the side now. I actually do webinars for grant writing and where to find grants for small businesses, specifically for creatives, but I don't do that as part of my job. So when I am not working, I spend a lot of my time driving, up to 6 hours to a job. Sometimes I'll drive 3 hours to a job. The job is 15 minutes, and then I drive 3 hours back. So a lot of times listening to audiobooks, a lot of time listening to podcasts and things like that. And then when I don't have anything that day, I'm at home writing notes for people.
So you got the Do you do any like digital design stuff like Fusion 360 or?
Most of my stuff is digital. I do Fusion 360 and I'll do Illustrator for the laser cutter. So
that's yeah, my catalog in SketchUp and Fusion 360 is much larger and more intricate than anything I've built.
So yeah, that's it. Most of my stuff that I've done, most of my commissions, I do a lot of award objects for like film festivals or things like that. And then I'll just do those, and then all of the funds just go back into the community, which is what I like. I don't use it as a form of income. So
that's good to be in that position, honestly, that your enjoyment or your side hustle, your hobby, whatever you want to call it, isn't critical to your survival. So you can do it or you can't, or you don't have to, whatever you want to do. And then the money that's your therapy budget, right?
Yes. So I mean, maybe someday I'll use the money for our finances, but it's really not that much to actually do that.
I think we should probably wrap it up here. But I'd like to thank you for coming on. I've enjoyed our conversation and enjoyed digitally meeting you a little bit more so than we have in the past.
Yeah, when are you coming down next?
When am I coming down next? I actually have a brother who lives in Boston, and so might come out to visit him at some point and then use that as a justification to visit everybody else around there. But I know I talked a little bit about it on the podcast about how I'm waiting to hear from disability insurance. And if all goes well, hopefully I'll hear today or tomorrow. I was supposed to hear 2 weeks ago. So, if all goes well and they decide that they're just going to cover me through the rest of my master's degree here, then my wife and I have been seriously considering doing the tour of the countryside for the year in the trailer sort of thing. And in which case our intent is to go out to the East Coast and hang out there for a month or so and then down to, Florida and...
Don't go to Florida.
No, it'll be just down, go say we've been there and then back out again and then go over to Arizona and hang out in the heat in Southern California, that type of stuff.
There you go. Come down in October. I hear there's something cool going on in upstate New York in October.
Well, if everything happens, that is the intent, but I haven't bought any tickets yet just because I'm not sure what's going to happen.
Understood.
But yeah, hopefully I got my fingers crossed. But I got some. So our trip there, I don't know if you followed anything of our trip up to the Arctic and back, but we went beachcombing and I brought back some logs, wood out of the Arctic Ocean, right? So if we do make it out there, my intent is to make a couple little boxes out of wood from the Arctic Ocean, and I'll bring one of those to the Maker Swap if we come out.
Well, I hope to see it.
Yeah, it'd be fun. Hopefully I can make it out, but we'll see.
Gotcha.
Anyway, thanks for being on. I appreciate it, and I enjoyed our conversation. And so, where can everybody find you? Everybody who's listening to this podcast has no idea who you are because
you can go on to Instagram to Archiana Serio, and you can find me there.
Sounds good. I will link you in the show notes. And again, I appreciate you for being on, and appreciate you for being the maker community's librarian.
Absolutely.
So, every time I see in your stories there where there's somebody who's tagged you in it, it always makes me smile and makes me think that you're one of those people who everybody needs to gang up on and do something nice for in return.
Nah, that's all right. That's not why I do it.
Well, that's okay that's not why you do it, but that doesn't mean you don't deserve it.
Thank you.
Just want to give a big thank you to the founding members of the podcast, Mr. Keith Drennan of Blackthorn Concepts, Mr. Matthew Serio of Artiano Serio, and Mr. Eric Peterson of Overall Makerworks. If you want to support the podcast, the next 2 patrons who join at any level will be added to the list of founding members who will receive the perpetual shout-out. If you don't want to support the show financially but feel that this is a conversation worth having, please share and tag me on your social media of choice. And thanks again for listening.